You are listening to the Global CTE Podcast with your host, Sylvester Chisom.
Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Global CTE Podcast. I am your host, Sylvester Chisom. This is the place where we wrap a blanket of goodwill around the CTE community, and we interview the best, the brightest, the movers, the shakers, the innovators, and industry partners who are really helping to make our next generation of education exceptional. Okay, today is no different. I have my good friend Kara Cunzeman here. Listen, this is the first time we're having a real rocket scientist on the show. So I'm excited. Let me tell you about my friend Kara. Kara is the director for strategic foresight at the Aerospace Corporation Center for Space Policy and Strategy. With the focus on cultivating futures thinking, Kara has been instrumental in preparing aerospace for innovative approaches in strategy acquisition and space technology management. Kara is known for her passion in transforming opportunity mindsets for a thriving future in space enterprise. Kara, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad we're doing this.
I am too. So for background, people are like, Sylvester, how'd you and Kara get connected? So our good friend Yarrow, who founded this organization called Hatch, and Kara and I spent some time hanging out in where were we in Nebraska, at the Arbor Day Farm in Nebraska for the Hatch Heartland Summit. And I mean, there were so many incredible people, thought leaders from all over the world, change makers, really trying to help create positive global impact in so many different elements, from education to climate change to space. And we caught a good vibe and had some great conversations. And I'm like, man, we're talking about space and education. I'm like, Kara, I got to have you on the show. What were your thoughts from your Hatch experience? I'm just curious.
Yeah, well, I think also just the fact that I probably never would have run into you, or it may have taken some time, but like you said, the second we started talking, we instantly connected, and our ethos was so aligned, and it was like this, lightning bolt of inspiration when I met you, and I'm just really grateful for that. And I think accelerating the amount of connections you have with people, all based on those who are looking to make the world better. We were able to cultivate relationships with people so fast, right? Especially post-pandemic. I really think it was such a gift. And, Sylvester, I have a feeling we're going to be good friends for many, many years to come. And I'm very grateful for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it was something I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I'm like, man, I'm having such thoughtful conversations, people who really care about changing the world and are passionate in so many different industries. So it was quite the experience.
I'm still processing it, but I loved being around other optimists and just refreshing and not feeling apologetic for having hope. We have to have hope for the future.
Very well said. As a futurist, very well said. Hope for the future. Okay. So yeah, so that's how we met. And I like to ask this question. You're doing so many amazing things as it's connected to space and future, future thinking and all of these things. But what's your origin story? How do you get here?
Yeah, no, I love that. Well, Hatch was in Nebraska, and it was so nice to be back in Midwest. I'm originally from Chicago, born and raised. I live in Washington, D.C. now, which is where the Center for Space Policy and my team is headquartered. But my dad was a helicopter pilot in the Army and a space enthusiast. So I got the space bug really early on. But I was really a multifaceted student. I was involved in a lot of different activities. And when I was deciding what I wanted to do, it was a really challenging decision. And I actually wanted to be an astrobiologist, which is somebody who studies life on other planets. And my father took me around to talk to professors because that's all that's the only way you get employed, by studying life on Earth, as be a professor and work at NASA. And he was like, you know what? Like, why don't you just go get your undergrad in engineering, and then you can do whatever you want. And so, and I would say, like, if somebody always asks you, like, oh, if you want a different job, like, what would you do? Mine were also right brain, left brain. Like, I would have loved to have been a rock star. I love music. I love fashion. I love interior design. I love throwing parties. Like, so I call myself like a Renaissance woman. Like, I just like a lot of things. I'm a generalist. So when I went into engineering, especially undergrad, especially that first year, I had a really hard time because it was basically just memorizing a lot of science and math. It wasn't even connecting it to real world problems. But I think I like got a C in math and I wanted to retake it. So I did summer school. And at the same time, I was very lucky and I got the opportunity to work in one of the hands-on laboratories, engineering laboratories. And that's where I got to start my research journey and seeing hands-on how research I was doing in materials engineering was directly helping people with Alzheimer's disease. And for me, that was like instant connection of like, okay, I guess I got to get through the foundationals and the boring stuff so that I can start making an impact. And then I serendipitously got very lucky. And I went to Purdue, which is in West Lafayette, Indiana, and they're known for their space program. But I actually got my undergrad in multidisciplinary engineering, which is bringing together multiple different types of disciplines together to solve hard problems. And I was before my time, I didn't know what I was, getting into, but that's essentially what I think everything's moving into, these very multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary teams. So I was into that early on before I even knew what futures was. So then I, decided to stay for grad school, and then went into the space industry and worked in the private sector a bit, and kind of mostly as a systems engineer, which, for those that don't know, systems engineers kind of are big picture thinkers. They pull together, different aspects of, systems and projects, and they do a lot of project management, and they look for opportunities. So I've always been a big picture thinker. And then I had the opportunity to go to where I am now. I'm celebrating my 10-year anniversary, believe it or not, at Aerospace, which is a federally funded research center. And that means that they're focused on providing systems engineering and integration capability to the U.S. government across commercial, national security, civil space. So we support NASA, we support, Space Force, and we're like the trusted advisor. We're not a for-profit company. We don't make systems. We're really there as integrators across the system, to find new opportunities and to help mitigate risks. And so I've been there, and in my work as an engineer, I got into some strategy types of questions very early on that really required a different way of thinking. And that's how I found strategic foresight. And I haven't looked back. And now I have a whole team focused on doing this for national security and space issues. And we're applying it, to a wide variety of problem sets. But it was not pre-planned. I never intended to become a futurist, let alone a rocket scientist, right?
A futurist and a rocket scientist. I love it.
Yes.
I think that's part of the reason I was so excited about talking with you, because it is such a unique career journey, and like what that looks like in a day-to-day job responsibility. But if we brought it down, what's something that has come from your organization, from Aerospace, that people may be aware of, that they may use in their daily life?
Yeah. Well, Aerospace got founded during the Cold War to help make missiles happen and function. And essentially the government was afraid of having the private sector, inform on things. So they created this new kind of neutral objective party. But we were one of the main inventors and integrators of GPS, which, for those that know Global Positioning System, it's literally what makes the world work. And we have a wonderful paper called The Value of Space at the Center for Space Policy and Strategy, in case you're interested in having some very clear, like, well, what is space actually doing for me? If you eat food, if you travel, I mean, it's everywhere. If you go on TikTok, you're using space and you don't even know it because it's so integrated in our lives. And yeah, we were
Like
essentially a really key component of making that work.
in what way, Kara? Like you're using space in what way? Like say more there. Like
Yeah,
how is
well,
that connected?
I mean, honestly, like financial transactions require specific timing, and position navigation timing, PNT, is all about what these satellites do, right? So they triangulate and they give you exact, precise data on timing and position. And that's literally what makes the world work. That's how goods get transferred. That's how money gets transferred. That's how information gets transferred. It's embedded in our lives. If you have a cell phone, and also if even if you don't, like, it is connected, and many people don't understand how valuable space is, and also how fragile it is. There's lots of things, right, that could knock out multiple GPS satellites at a time, from a solar flare to some sort of cyber hack, and space is integral in our lives.
Yeah. That's so cool. I when you told me that, I was like, wow, are you serious? Like it's like, yeah, GPS. I said, that's well, yeah, I'm using that every day, right? And I don't think we realize that how connected some of these things are. When we look out into the sky, or when we hear about a rocket launch for a new satellite or something like that. Something else that I you just brought it up. You all
Mhm.
support Space Force. When I first saw that we were, I think that was the last administration or something when we
Mhm.
launched
Mhm.
Space
Mhm.
Force. I was like, what is that? So if you can share anything,
Yeah.
like how do we how do you all support Space Force?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long time coming, and people like to joke. There was a Steve Carell show, which actually I thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
But in all sense, I mean, Space Force has really stood up because of this recognition that space is critical infrastructure, and we need a way to defend it. But also, as a futurist, I'm thinking about, there's a lot of value that is yet to be created, markets that don't exist yet, that will exist in the future. And just like we stood up GPS was a military function that we ended up scaling to the world. I suspect there will be things both kind of obviously and also kind of tangentially that come out of expansion into space. And I think part of that needs to be a security aspect. And so I was really excited to see that. Obviously, they're a fraction of the size and budget as many of the other services, and they're playing catch up. They don't have 100, 200, 300 years of service that the others do. But I think it's a really good kind of proactive thing that needs to happen. And it's important. And I think there's a major disconnect with space right now of, why do we need a space force? Why do we need to defend space?
Mhm.
Also, why are we going to space when we have climate issues? Well, I have to tell you, space is an integral part of having us wake up and tell the story about why what we are doing is irresponsible and need to change. And I also personally believe space will be the key to unlocking a lot of these innovations that give back to Earth. And they are currently, but I think there's going to be even more. And this conversation of like, either or is all wrong. It needs to be an and. Innovation, scaling, benefits always have to be an and. So I think that's a really important message too, is like space can literally change individual lives.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I'm I'm just thinking about so many things right now as you just
I have that effect.
as you
I do
just
have that effect.
so Kara, you really have me thinking about educational opportunities. I want to center this for our education community. What are some potential careers now or in the future, or competencies connected to those careers, so that we should be preparing our students for?
Yeah, no, I love this question. I love this like careers and competencies question. I mean, even in my own career, right? I have a job that didn't exist 5 years ago as a space
Wow.
futurist. Now I have a team, which is pretty humbling. But also, even as a systems engineer, I technically got my undergrad in multidisciplinary, but my master's is in aero and astro engineering. Technically, I'm in the space field, but my job requires a whole slew of skill sets, right? All the way from, deep engineering expertise to project management to futures thinking to strategy. And none of that was really taught on these tracks in school because they weren't really linked to hard problems, right? We tend to focus on disciplines rather than the problems we're going to solve. So thinking about jobs that don't exist today, what kinds of hard problems are there going to be? The private sector is really booming in space. And so there's a potential whole slew of markets that are going to exist that don't exist today, as we expand into space. So thinking about alternative energy solutions like space-based solar power, fusion, nuclear, the point-to-point space, so going from near Earth orbit to the moon to beyond, and with that, eventually people will follow, right? So it's not just robotics, it's people. And if you're going to have people living off world, not just visiting for short stints, you need all that infrastructure that we have on Earth. You need food, you need police, you need doctors and medical care, fuel refueling stations. And so I think just like the basic foundations of what, kind of more the obvious things. And then some of the non-obvious things are how space is going to help advance, technologies on Earth. I'm thinking pharmaceuticals, additive manufacturing. There's a lot of really interesting potential case studies on, manufacturing in microgravity that can have advantage. Living off of the moon with resources that are there and building from what's there. And also thinking about, like, if humans are in space, the two hardest problems are radiation and psychology. So all of the kinds of technologies, whether that's AI, kind of monitoring people, physiology, or cognitive activity to indicate if there's a safety issue, to just like social gatherers, like how do you create sense of community, which is going to be so important as these humans are being isolated. So that, right? So those are for the people in space, but I also think about the jobs on Earth that are going to be impacted, right? We, at Hatch, we talked about, there was a lot of folks from the food community there. And I actually think there's a big connection, right, with food science, what we learn, off-world, generating our own food that we can bring back to Earth and vice versa. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting, like, space hybrid terrestrial food engineers that might specialize in both traditional crops, but also new, maybe additive manufactured foods. There's a whole slew, I think, of careers there. You have space chef, a space connoisseur, maybe a musician. Like, the sky's the limit. I think it's like, I find it so interesting, and also feeling like I'm a walking poster for jobs that don't exist yet, right? And I helped see there was a need. I identified a new hard problem, which for us was thinking strategically about space and national security and managing uncertainty. And I kept asking a lot of questions, and that's kind of what led us here. So I think that's a really encouraging story to tell, like, our up and coming leaders and young people about, like, you in some ways are going to help create all of these new economies, not just for space, but everywhere. And you have to help, we talk about competencies. You need to have the skill sets of identifying what are the hard problems, right? So you're not just getting bogged down in, like, oh, I'm just going to focus on a specific technology. Because at the end of the day, tech doesn't get you much if you're not really understanding the overall effect you want to bring. So I think some part of our workforce has got to be the connectors, and they got to be really good at what they do, and they got to be strategists. And then we also need, and you have to have some depth there too, because if you don't have a lot of technical depth, you might get lost, right, in tying it all together. So I think this competencies balancing, we call it the T at aerospace, like, thinking broad, thinking deep. How do you manage that? Getting the T in the right places is going to be a really interesting, I think, skill building exercise for the up and coming workforce.
Okay, you just said something. I've got like 5 questions
I know,
based on what you just said. So no, thank you. Okay, The T. Talk to me about that. That's an interest. Is that a concept around how to think about
Your
problems or
role,
solutions? Your role.
your
How to,
role,
okay.
your role, and how
Okay.
organizationally you want to scatter your generalists and your your systems engineers, and then your technical experts, and you want to have coverage right across it. But
Yeah.
then also you can think about individual roles. Like, I consider myself a full T as a person. I'm deep, but I'm also wide, right?
Okay. Okay. Say going broad and going deep at the
Mm-hmm.
same time. So the generalist matching up the generalist and the specialist.
We undervalue generalists in the education system. And you don't really learn that until you get out in the real world. And it's like you have an innate, I think it's the people who are just ask a lot of questions like, why are we doing this? I don't understand. How's this connected to the bigger
Yeah.
picture? And then you kind of create that. But I wish we would have better
Mhm.
educational tracks to cultivate those. Because I think it's the, even if that's not your job function, it's good to have those perspectives.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think about generalists. It's interesting for you to bring it to like a science standpoint. I always think about it, generalists and specialists, from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
Mm,
In a business building, like when you're in startup phase, you end up with a lot of generalists. Like you're the CEO, and it's like you're wearing like five hats. You're doing
yes.
marketing, you're doing product development, but then as a organization grows, you need more specialists on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Like this person does marketing, this
Right.
person does finance, this person does HR, so that your
Yes.
team can grow from that standpoint. But I like how I never thought about the T. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
was, that was good. You mentioned, you referenced this. I wrote this down. We operate in industry and education. We think about disciplines versus hard problems.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me more about that if we approach that differently in
Yeah.
education, where we focused on the hard problem first and maybe then the discipline.
I mean, this gets back to building a society that is mission driven. And you can be mission driven no matter if you work in the private sector or not, right? But it's about helping society, building capacity, building new opportunities. And at the end of the day, hopefully all of us, when we're doing an activity, we're doing it because there's a hard problem that's in our way from achieving those greater opportunities. But so much when we teach in our classrooms, we're teaching out of a textbook completely disconnected from the reality of today. And even worse, they have to be prepared for this future that doesn't exist yet. So we're not even equipping, right, with the capacity to think about, yes, that's okay. Those are hard problems of today, but what are the hard problems of the future? And how do we get ahead of that? So it's like this multifaceted problem of, and a lot of times people will, the first thing they ask, beyond your name, okay, what's your current role and what's your background? And people
Mhm.
automatically want to put you in a bin. Oh, you're an engineer. Oh, you're a scientist. Oh, you're a business person. And I think that those are going to have to break down over time, because we need multifaceted problem solvers. At the end of the day, we need critical thinkers who can
Mhm.
real because we have some hard problems right now, and they're going to get tougher, and we need to build an innovative culture. And right now, I just think the way that we teach and stovepipe English
Yeah.
and math and science, and you're good at English, but you're not good at science. It's awful. It's the wrong message. We should be helping kids figure out what hard problems light them up, right? Like, what do they want to do? What gets them really excited? And
Yeah.
they can participate no matter if they're good at math or not good at math. I think we have the messaging all wrong.
Let's so 100%. And I've had several guests on the pod talk about the importance of interdisciplinary
Mm-hmm.
education. We see it playing out in some schools that are really innovating. Like I work with one in Chicago, in Evanston.
Mm-hmm.
One of our school partners, they do algebra and entrepreneurship. So it's
Oh, neat.
connecting the two. So
Yes.
you get excited about math because you're working on what you just said, a problem you care about,
Yes.
that's a business problem. And then we'll talk about break-even points and,
I
pricing
love that.
strategy, and connecting it to the
Yeah.
math. But I'm curious if you were, maybe this is what your futurist hat on. Okay. How would you approach education starting with, how do we source hard problems? Like if you're telling
Hmm.
this to high school teacher who's going to lead high school kids, where do we start? How do we help young people think about the hard problems they care about?
Oh, now you're gonna let me give a quick intro into strategic foresight.
Yes.
So, whenever we're assessing the landscape, we like to start with looking at, okay, we call it the baseline. Where are we today? What's going on? Like, what are the good things? What are the bad things? What are the trends, right? The things that we know, the things that we have data on, the things that we know. They could change, but like that's where we are today, right? That's step one, right? Step two is something we call horizon scanning. So it's scanning for signals of change that could have potential paradigm shift implications. So something like you know, recent legal um, uh, mandates that it was somebody that ruled, I think, in South Africa that an AI system had legal rights over a certain patent, and it listed the person who wrote the code as second, right? So little signals that like wouldn't hit mainstream news, but you're like, oh my gosh, like that would have major implications for business and for how we treat humans versus machines and like the hybrid. So looking for signals of change that challenge assumptions that we have about our systems today. And then we use those to create alternative futures that can help us think about the corner cases essentially of the future. And we use those to look at implications and build resilient strategies, right? So, are you going to have a kindergartner do this? No,
Yeah.
but you can help them think about like what if statements, like, well, what if this weren't true? Or what if we could be on the moon? Like, they're some of the best to get great ideas because they're not really bounded by, society. Um, and then you can use those scenarios to identify, well, in this particular future, for example, like let's talk about, I don't know, the future where the private sector does hit $1 trillion, which is one of the projections in 2030. Wow, that is a lot of extra cash, right? So some of the hard problems with that, right, are how do you funnel money appropriately to build these systems so that we actually have capacity for humans to be there? How do we manage the supply chain? Like, do we even
Mm,
have a workforce to deliver $1 trillion worth of value from space? I don't know. So you can work your way back and use these different windows of the future to look at hard problems.
yeah.
And the real power is you step back and you look across the future states. And then you can really think, what are the most important things? What are the universal things? What are the contradictory things? And that's really,
Mm.
really interesting. So futures thinking, I believe, is almost essential at anticipating those hard problems. And if futurists are able to put more of those future hard problems in front of our growing educators and workforce, we're going to be
Mhm.
able to start solving those faster.
Wow. You're okay. So you're making me think now. Actually, I'm going back to Hatch. You're making me think about a
Hmm.
conversation I had with Jen Stein, and um I think when she's the lead designer at Experimental. I think she worked at USC or something. And she sent me these futurist cards,
Hmm.
like, to help set
Yes.
up prompts. And as you started talking, they're like sitting on my desk, and I'm like, the thing from the future. So like one is connecting something, and it's saying, how would this look in the future related to climate change, and what is
Hmm.
it? So it like sets up these prompts for that I think could be good for conversations to get
Yes.
people, because most of us don't think. I feel like a lot of education is thoughts from the past,
Yes.
historical in nature, maybe some now, but like we could move. we should be thinking more about the future. And I'm sure
Well,
you.
I mean, think about that. I mean, the world that you're preparing this young
Yeah,
generation to move into is not the past. It's
right.
actually changing radically. And so
Yeah,
you're using all these historical context and rooting in all of that. And I think to your point, we should be spending more time thinking about where it's going.
yeah. So, okay, all right. Now I really want to dig in on this. Okay, so one of the we don't like boxes here, but one of the boxes someone may put you in is that you are a futurist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
can you explain what is a futurist? Is there a framework for this? Like, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. And it's funny because I actually futurist is one of the boxes I have a love-hate relationship with. Because it
Okay.
sounds really cool, but also it implies you only think about the future and you're like in this la la science fiction land. Um, in a nutshell, I say I'm a strategist first, and
Okay.
we apply something called strategic foresight. So that
Mhm.
is the discipline. But really, it's all super scary. It's like, future is strategic foresight. All it is better approaches for managing uncertainty.
Mhm.
It's just updating how we do strategy for the 21st century, where we're all interconnected, things are unpredictable, things are not certain, things are not linear. That's all that it is. It's actually a simple complex, concept, but it gets ambiguous because you're talking about futures that don't exist and you're talking about implications that may or may not be there, and then you're hedging your bets on where do you put your money. So that's where we lose a lot of people, right? Is you need to be transparent in the full process for how you get to A to Z. But the reality is that a lot of decisions are made by gut with little strategy. I mean, we talk to people about improving strategy. A lot of times people don't even really understand the discipline of rigorous strategy, assessing your changing landscape and assessing your options in the sense that not just reacting and protecting, but also expanding and thinking about opportunities, which I think we need much more of society to have that mindset.
Mhm.
And then taking that, not just admiring the problem or the opportunities, but taking that and acting on it, which is really hard because usually the incentive structure pushes you away from doing the risky thing, right? But it's
Mhm.
those risky things that really drive a lot of interesting new opportunities and values. So it takes really strong leadership. So, in a nutshell, I think futurists as a job are there to help people imagine the art of the possible, but then also like motivate them to change what they're doing at present to build those desired futures. And I think that's really important. We're like coaches, right? Like we're trying
Mhm.
to help move people along and I always call myself a fire starter, like to light a bunch of little fires, right? And get it to a point where it's like really burning,
Right.
right?
Yeah. So, is there a framework to the approach of thinking about um
Yes. Yeah, there is.
strategic foresight, or how
So yeah,
can you
so
talk
for
about that?
those, you can actually, believe it or not, get your master's or PhD in strategic foresight. There's a couple of programs at the university level. Um, interestingly enough, there isn't like agreed upon like standard for foresight, but in general, people agree on the process of what we call the FIA cycle, foresight to insight to action, which is what I previously described. It's
Right.
the
Okay.
foresight part is scanning the horizon, the insight part
Okay.
is doing different activities by bringing in diverse perspectives, thinking about alternative futures and implications. That's usually where like the weird magic happens of structured thinking and group activities and workshops. And then the action piece, actually putting that into a roadmap, a strategy, an implementation plan, a project, right? So that simple cycle is
Yeah.
what everybody kind of locks in, but how they do it varies widely in the community.
All right. I want to how would we go about teaching this? Like if we have a
Mm,
class at the high, let's say probably high school level would probably be an appropriate level for this. Like what would your thoughts around a curriculum for
yeah.
teaching this at an earlier age? Like if you imagine 10th grade, you crossing this information earlier, like would you even be
Yeah.
further along in your thinking or
Oh, for
process?
sure.
So I'm curious your thoughts around a design for a
Well,
parent's future
Sylvester,
child.
I was hoping our newly created partnership with Hatch would help us on my latest endeavor, which is
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's
yeah,
talk
for
about
the
it.
audience, typical, I mean, if anything from both educators and folks who are trying to figure out what they're going to do for a living, it's very rarely are things planned A to Z, right? So um even just a few months ago, never thought I'd be saying what I'm saying now, but I have decided to take on the role of leading the US hub for an organization called Teach the Future, which is a nonprofit focus exactly on what you just have been talking about, Sylvester, which is scaling futures literacy. So I'm an educator of professionals. I am, other than being a mom of two under four, so I'm about to get schooled very quick on how to teach those kids. I don't actually have a lot of capacity right now and
Yeah,
what the right approach is, but
yeah.
um, the US is behind on this. And so Teach the Future was stood up by Peter Bishop, who founded the University of Houston Foresight program, which is a graduate level education program. However, there are pockets of folks around the United States and internationally that have been practicing and trying to scale foresight in all realms of education. So K through 12, high school, high school as part of that, and then also, university, trade schools, and then beyond, right? Professionals. And some of the insights that I got when I first started attending these international discussions on teaching the future um, were that we cannot wait until they're in high school. We have got to start early and we've got to start often. And so, again, I am not an educator and I am
Hmm.
looking. This is a great plug to just say if you're fired up about teaching the future, please reach out to Sylvester and I because we're getting ready to light a bunch of fires on this problem in the United States. But I actually think it should be embedded. I think it should be just like you were mentioning that amazing curriculum of tying in investing in algebra. I think we need to find ways to just weave in foresight and future storytelling into different activities that are already in our curriculum. And the same should
Hmm.
be for innovation and group work and all
Hmm.
these what I'll call future competencies that we have to start training now. It
Yeah.
needs to be embedded. And then obviously, as these kids are going through their time in the education system, you can get a little bit maybe more sophisticated in the types of questions you ask and the types of analysis they do, so that by the time they reach college and by the time they're in the workforce, they have that framing. And again, they don't have to do that as a job function, but that perspective will help them even in their individual lives as they're making decisions for themselves and their families, as they're deciding who to vote for, as they're being public citizens for democracy. I think these skill sets are really important in scaling a really functioning and thriving society in the world that we're in. So I think it's got to start young. And I
Yeah.
agree with you. It's how do you do it easily? There are some folks that Peter works with that have some great
Okay.
ideas and that have some, especially outside of the US, that have scaled this.
I, so there are other countries and their education systems
Oh
that
yeah,
are
way far
future, like,
along.
can you share
Yeah.
any thoughts, or what do you know
Yes.
about
So
like
I would say
Singapore, or like
Singapore,
I figured that.
Brazil,
Uh-huh.
Denmark, Finland, pockets in the UK, UAE,
Hmm.
Canada. Canada has a very robust federal level program of directly integrating foresighting into their national decision making. But I have been floored with the examples of my Teach the Future Hub colleagues around the world who've
Hmm.
been able to reach literally like millions of lives. And the US, we have pockets, but it's not been organized. It certainly has
Hmm.
not been a push for scaling futures literacy. And one of the reasons why I decided to say yes to Peter, listen, I got two girls and I care about the skill sets that they're going to need to survive and
Hmm.
to help thrive and build this really exciting future. And I think it's in my capacity to help start that push. And yeah, am I busy? Yeah. But like, if we can't give our kids a better future, then what are we doing? This is the most important thing.
Wow. What are some of those connected to the strategic foresight? Maybe if you have not mentioned all of them, what are some competencies that we should be thinking about layering in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, like especially in like the technical side, like science and math, we always teach like, did you memorize it? Did you like, are you an individual contributor? We have, group projects, but it's always like, who stood out the most? And so this collaboration, like instead of competition, which is good, competition's not bad, but like in the right context, I think collaborating teams who compete against each other is maybe healthier, because nowhere in the real world, very few circumstances, is an individual actor solely responsible for an outcome, right? It takes teamwork to make the dream work. We all know that, and we don't really teach it. So I think collaboration, soft skills of, just being a good human and connecting and having empathy and recognizing diverse viewpoints and making sure voices are heard. Those are things, right? Those are really critical things. Critical thinking. Am I even solving the right problem? Is this even, most people just jump in and do, which is not, I understand you can't admire the problem the whole time, but I think understanding what the problem is first. Those are important skills to have. And then of course, public speaking, communication, clear writing. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's so funny you're mentioning all of these things. And I was wondering if you would go there because you mentioned critical thinking earlier. So I'm on the advisory board for an organization, America Succeeds, which the focus is durable skills. And they ran uh, they ran a study on 80 million job postings and looked at what were the most requested skills that the workforce was looking for. And it's all those things that you just called out. The top ones were communication, collaboration, teamwork, metacognition, mindfulness, like these things that the critical thinking over a technical skill. So I think that's so interesting to hear you say that as from the strategic foresight side. These are important things. Very important things.
The most important things, honestly. I think we lose sight of a lot of that with our quarterly earnings and the election cycle and everything. But like really, I mean, all of us, whether you have kids or not, whether you're an educator or not, like we are building the circumstances for the next generation, for society. And we have direct influence in if that's going to be a good or bad future, right? Like, so I think it's like I've always been passionate about it, but since I've become a mom, I mean, man, I'm fired up.
Yeah, this whole episode you've been fired up. So thank you so
sorry.
much for.
I had two coffees this
wonderful.
morning.
No, it's no, it's wonderful. So I'm going to close out with my last question, which I ask every guest, and this is the first time I get to ask someone who specializes in strategic foresight. So the question that I ask is about career tech education, the career exploration, preparing the kids for the future. So what's your vision for the future of CTE, of future of career tech education?
Yeah, well, I think a future where everyone feels like they have agency over building their aspirational future, career or careers, plural. Like, do you have to have just one? Where we're building a community and a platform that encourages collaboration and inspiration, where it's accessible, it's equitable, it's, really uplifting everyone, particularly, in the United States, where we really need to focus on re-engaging our educational systems, where teachers are empowered and feel like they're really valuable, and they're not just like running through the numbers, where teachers are, compensated and valued, but also where they are equipped with the skill sets to really drive our future generations to become more than what the present is. I think that's also really interesting. And where future's competency is just, it's a given. Like that's my ideal future, where like we don't even have to have this conversation because we'd already be thinking in multiple futures. Like, I wish more people would ask me this question.
Yeah. Outstanding. Thank you. This has been a delightful conversation. And I mean, so many great insights you've shared. If someone wants to reach out to you to learn more, how to engage with the work you're doing, or to bring you in for an amazing keynote, how would they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I can be found in a couple of places. You can reach me at futures@aero.org for all of my spacey, geeky futures work, and or on the national security and strategy side. And then Kara at teachthefuture.org for any educational piece. But thanks so much. This has been awesome, and really appreciate all the work you're doing, Sylvester.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, if you enjoyed this episode, do not be selfish. Share it with a friend. A lot of great gems were dropped here. Things about space exploration, careers connected to it. What else did we touch on? We talked about how to think about the future as a leader, as a student, how to prepare our students to think in this way, which I think is just incredible. I'm walking away with a lot of things on my mind here. So you've given me a lot to think about. So I know our audience feels the same way. So share it with a friend. Until the next episode, remember, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Global CTE Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to be the first to know about future episodes.